started in 2022 with the goal of creating whiskeys based on the concept of terroir. Terroir is more of a wine term or a concept in that the sum of everything around you creates the flavor in the product that you're making. And this isn't necessarily a new concept into whiskey, but what's really unique with where we're at here in Minnesota is that everything you need to make bourbon grows exceptionally well in the state of Minnesota. I come from Shells, and 10 years ago, we had the idea that we could grow barley here locally, that we'd use that barley to become a large portion of what we were making at Shells in the beer. We were 2 weeks from harvest, watching the sunset stand in the middle field, having a beer and taking in the moment, and they'd asked what else we could do with barley. I kind of threw out, well, you can make whiskey with it, not necessarily thinking we'd make the whiskey with it, but that was the kind of the initial beginning of the slow burn that would become Black Cross Distilling. A couple of years later, I had an event in Nashville. Nate, let's go do the bourbon trail. There's worse ways to spend some time there. But as we were, touring these distilleries and becoming obsessed with bourbon, one of the things that really kind of cemented our idea and our concept was, everything down there is very much rooted in tradition. And it's something that I have a great appreciation for coming from Shells, but seeing the other side of the coin in that we can do something different. We can make a product that speaks to an area. And by the time we left, we had a pretty solid game plan of what we were going to do. And that involves growing all the ingredients that we use to make our whiskey. Corn, rye, wheat, and barley. And beyond that, we don't grow them ourselves, but the oak and the barrels that we use to age our whiskey, everything comes from within this state. So as we introduce these whiskeys, we really want to have a strong identity and a connection to where we're growing in the land.
So this year we did not grow any barley. The barley we grew last year, we have enough to get through this year yet. What we did grow out there, we've got a winter wheat. It's called a winter wheat. It's a South Dakota variety, and a Danko rye. We planted those on October 10th. One of the reasons we specifically did winter wheats is in Minnesota, it does get warm and humid. These small grain crops do like cooler, drier climates. Getting in the ground a lot earlier and harvesting a little bit earlier helps with yield and quality. We did plant them both the same day, and we hope to harvest these crops probably first, second, third week of July. Probably in the next couple of weeks, they'll hit a dough stage and they'll harden, and then it'll start drying down.
None of this would have happened without the help of University of Minnesota, at least being as successful, I think, as we've been. And a big part of that is one, having Joachim, having a cell phone number in pocket to answer questions, but then two, especially with the wheat and rye, there's an extension office in Lamberton, which is about 40 minutes west of here. And a year before we were, about to start construction, we went and visited the test plots there right before harvest. Got to see all the different varieties that are being grown by the University of Minnesota, because they're constantly trying out varieties from, not just ones that are being bred here, but ones that are grown and bred in all different parts of the country. Looked at the wheat and rye varieties kind of in two different lenses. We started with the wheat, in that wheat is kind of just like Wonder Bread, and it's just sweet and light and kind of a blank canvas, more or less, for the fermentation character that you're going to get in the distillation process, and also the barrel character. So we looked at a variety more so from the agronomics, and that's something that's going to grow well, do really well here. You're going to yield well, and then just that it's going to be just nice and sweet and light. The rye, though, on the other hand, that's when we kind of took a very different approach. Rye and rye whiskeys, big and bold and spicy, and so that's something that we wanted to kind of focus on. And so I know this is not great for Nate to hear, but took the agronomic yield out of the equation and looked more on the flavor side of things. And so we settled on something that doesn't yield as well and make Nate as much money, but the flavor was the main component there. The final two that we were kind of choosing between was Ryman which is a variety that was bred at the University of Minnesota kind of in the early 70s, an older variety. And then this other one called Danko, which is a Polish variety of rye that was used for rye bed production. And that obviously, if it tastes good in bread, it's going to make a good whiskey. So that's why we settled with that one. We lost a year last year because of the drought. And so we're actually sourcing rye that we're using currently from the Alexandria region of Minnesota that is made with a Ryman variety of rye. So we've kind of gone back and forth now between Danko to Ryman, and we'll be going back to Danko. So with that, we used a lot of the University of Minnesota's help. So I'm going to hand it over to Joachim Wiersma here, and he's going to talk about what he's been doing.
I will look back at this experience that started in Roseville and led to some really cool things as a success story for myself. This is cool. What they're doing is cool. Far North Spirits and Hella pretty much had the same question. Can you do different things with rye varieties that the big boys don't do? And so that led to a grant with MDA, and we discovered different rye varieties impart different flavors to the white whiskey and ultimately to the finished product. It's been around for a long, long time, but it's always grown on the most marginal soil. Why? Well, think of it, it's pretty different in height, right? Think of that as also on the bottom. Rye can find water, rye can find nutrients, but other materials can't. And because it's a winter material and it's almost impossible to kill, this is why it fits on very marginal soils throughout the northern area, basically the northern states. Winter wheat, Minnesota is kind of a transition between the plain states like Kansas, Nebraska, which is all winter wheat, and Canada, which is all free. This new all, and sorry if you have to do this the second time, this used to be all wheat territory. Mill City, Minneapolis' nickname, is because it sourced all its wheat from this area, basically the southern part of the state. It wasn't until corn got introduced that wheat started to migrate out north and west. This is shorter because now the winter wheats are semi-dwarf. Wheat used to be this tall, now they're this shorter because that allows for increase in productivity. This is a public variety on the South Dakota State University. I know it really well. And it's a nice all-around wheat. And that's my job.
What we're doing here, kind of going back to our original story of like when we were touring through the old distilleries, every place had their perfect mash bill that they've been making for 200 years. This is the recipe, it's the best way to make it. And as a startup, when you can't home distill legally, how do you come up with that perfect mash bill? And so we kind of took a different approach, and again, utilizing this kind of trying to think outside of the box. We're not making a set mash bill for our bourbon. We're just making blending components. And so the way we do our production process here is we do all single grain whiskeys and just fill barrels full of blending components. So we have straight corn whiskey, straight wheat whiskey, straight rye whiskey, and then we use straight malt whiskey when we blend those to make our bourbon. But this is kind of our initial kickoff. We wanted to talk about the agricultural piece of it and use this as a lead into it.